Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Wisconsin Parkinson Association's educational video series. I'm Jeremy Otte, Director of Outreach and Education with the Wisconsin Parkinson Association. WPA provides hope, community, support, and resources for people with Parkinson's disease and their loved ones. Today, we are going to talk with Rick Paddock from Transcend. Rick trains and coaches individuals how to amplify their natural abilities and life experiences to transcend what they previously believed was possible for themselves. Welcome, Rick. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeremy. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm as we are in the Milwaukee area, I grew up in the Milwaukee area. And looking back, I think throughout my life, one of the commonalities, I've always been a student of the mind. I've always been interested in our own ability to update our minds and how we think and feel about our lives. And I've also always been, as an adult at least, an entrepreneur. So I've owned a direct mail business, a house flipping or real estate investment business. And now I'm a coach, a trainer, a hypnotist. And I like to say I went from flipping houses to flipping minds.
So it sounds like a fun journey getting to that point.
Yeah.
One of the things I saw on your website, you talk a lot about mindfulness. What does mindfulness mean to you when you're trying to explain that to somebody?
Yeah, so there's, mindfulness is a term that often is combined with meditation. And it's kind of interesting. It's become a buzzword, mindfulness meditation or mindfulness, almost to the point where I think people kind of turn it off because they hear it so much. But it's incredibly powerful. And I like to separate the two because meditation can kind of scare people because people think, oh, my mind's too busy. I don't have the focus to meditate. But we all have the ability to be mindful. So if I would describe or give a definition to mindfulness, well, I've heard a couple, one from Dan Harris. Dan Harris used to be or is still a news anchor on ABC News. And he had a very public panic attack watched by millions of people. And he found that mindfulness helped him with anxiety. His definition, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, of mindfulness is noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting carried away. And so my definition is similar, and it's basically mindfulness or being mindful is just noticing or being aware of anything in the present moment without judgment. So that's something that we often do. Actually, we're always doing it subconsciously. Our subconscious is always noticing our environment. But we have the ability to consciously be mindful, to consciously notice or be aware of anything in the present moment. And then that last part can be the difficult part, without judgment.
And I think you just hit it too, Rick. I was just going to say, without judgment, I think is really an important part. So noticing thoughts and feelings without judgment. So right now, we're under the whole COVID-19 situation. A lot of us safer at home for a long time. We're starting to come out. How do you feel maybe using some of this mindfulness can help people cope with or adjust to this new norm at this time?
Well, being mindful, it's interesting. It's such a simple process. So if we go back to that definition of noticing or being aware of anything. So if we consciously pause and just notice, I like to say, internally or externally. So noticing your internal thoughts and feelings, or just externally noticing your environment around you. When we become mindful, when we notice that, mindfulness has been proven through a lot of peer-reviewed research to automatically reduce our stress. And so it is stressful in this time we're living in. This is a time of unknown, a time where we've never been through these things, having to stay at home, having to deal with, our internal thoughts and our and feelings. So when we're mindful, when we take a moment to be in the moment and simply notice our thoughts and feelings, it does a couple of things. It relaxes us or reduces our stress really in two wonderful ways, psychologically and physiologically. So being mindful relaxes us psychologically because when we're in the present moment, we can't be feeling past emotions like regret, guilt, or shame. Because when we're feeling those, we're in the past. not in the present. And we also can't be feeling future emotions like fear or worry, which a lot of us are feeling at this stay-at-home time. There's a lot of unknown. But when we're in the moment, we're automatically focused on the now, and in generally every moment, the now, we're safe, we're okay. And so that's the psychological relaxation. And then the physiological relaxation, when we're focused on the now, it stimulates what's called our vagus nerve, which sends a relaxation response to our body. Our heart rate drops, our breathing slows and smooths out. And so there are physiological benefits of just being in the moment without judgment. It's very subtle, but it's very powerful.
I can see from a Parkinson's patient perspective, stress and anxiety can make my symptoms worse. Yes. So if I'm able to use some of those mindfulness and stay in the present and really get those physiological effects going, that may help some of those symptoms relax and help me focus on the here and now, and not what might happen 5 minutes from now.
Absolutely. I'm sure some of your viewers or listeners can think about and recognize when they were in a hobby or a task or an activity where they were very present. And so that could be gardening, it could be knitting, it could be reading a great book or watching a movie. Those unwanted symptoms of Parkinson's are reduced. That's being mindful. And yeah, it's incredibly beneficial.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the other things you talked about, kind of looking at your website and some of the stuff you talked about mindfulness, but you also talked about forming good habits. Now, I know for myself, being safer at home for 2 months, I've maybe formed some bad habits, maybe one too many trips to the refrigerator or the snack cabinet, if you will. So how would you work with people that maybe have developed some good habits? How do they make those part of their lifestyle when we're not safer at home? We're actually back out in the community doing things, but we develop these good habits and should carry them with us, even though things have changed.
Yeah, great question. And so I guess I'd answer that a couple of ways. First of all, there are as many different people as there are in the world. There are that many different ways to create habits. We all develop and create habits in our own way. But if we think about what a habit is, it's an automatic response, an automatic thought, feeling, action, or reaction. And because it's automatic, we're not consciously thinking about it or choosing it. Our subconscious is thinking about it or choosing it. It's coming up automatically. And so if we look at how does our subconscious create habits, we know that there are kind of 3 primary ways that our subconscious will embrace, begin, and then keep a habit. So the way that I remember it, there's an acronym, TAR. So this is how our habits stick, TAR. So the T stands for trauma. And if we think about traumas that happen in our lives, it shocks our subconscious, and because our subconscious's number one directive is to keep us safe, it takes that trauma and applies it to our lives to create safety moving forward. Second way our subconscious creates habits is through authority figure. So especially as kids and growing up, we think about the modeling that our parents, our teachers, our friends' parents, our neighbors do. And we see those things, and our subconscious takes that as reality, and that becomes our habit. But the third way is the way that it's kind of our ace in the hole. The R is for repetition. And so we can think about the way that we've developed habits, tying our shoes, driving cars, learning how to type. Through repetition, we can develop a new habit. So coming back to mindfulness is a great starting point, because being mindful creates a pause where we can then choose to respond or create a habit, act in a way that we choose rather than react. So mindfulness shifts us from reacting automatically to responding in a mindful way. So how do we then create habits? Through repetition, over and over. And so being mindful about what we want. So, to your point, perhaps you are aware that, all right, I'm going to the fridge for a snack, a soda, a beer, or whatever too often. Being mindful and pausing and recognizing, all right, what would I rather have? I'd rather have water. I'm getting the beer out of the fridge. I'm getting the soda out. I'm putting the water in the place. And through repetition, we can create new habits. And again, because everybody creates them in new ways, there's always little nuances, but that's kind of the basics of how we on a neurological level, create habits.
And I like what you said. It's not just the repetition of doing it. You use my example of the refrigerator. It's removing the negative influences and focusing on the positive influences. So like you said, if maybe I should be drinking more soda or more water than soda, remove the soda from the environment, it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a number of little nuances that we can do. And if we look at our past successes, those things in our lives that we like, our habits that we like, the successes we've had, whether they're personal habits or professional habits, relational habits, look at what we've done. What did I do to create those habits and find that same pattern? Perhaps in the past, I recognized that I needed to set my alarm earlier to get up to get those things done or to get out and exercising. It's being proactive and kind of planning for that new habit that you want. I know a lot of people in this time where we're staying at home a lot more have recognized that a positive way to build a new habit is to not watch as much news, or perhaps to get outside more and get fresh air, recognizing what those are and then finding a way to repeat that over and over and reaping the benefits. Because it is through repetition that we begin on a neurological level to create new neural pathways. And when we repetitively do things in that same way, those old neural pathways kind of fade out and die off. And that's why repetition is so powerful.
Well, and I would think somebody in your position, Rick, with what you do, you'd be encouraged with the Safer at Home that I heard, puzzles were through the roof. People were buying puzzles, playing games at home, interacting with friends and family way more. And again, kind of removing maybe those negative, the news type of thing, and doing things that are more relaxing. And again, developing those new neural pathways. I got to assume you probably were really in favor of that and happy to see people doing that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I think probably most of our viewers and listeners here can recognize that despite perhaps some challenges and difficulties they're facing, there has been a silver lining. They've noticed the benefit of perhaps, even as we're speaking about it now, being more mindful, slowing down, being present in their relationships, whether it's on the phone or with Zoom or doing the puzzles or the coloring books that are so popular. Coloring books are a great mindfulness tool. So there is that silver lining that's come out of this. Absolutely.
Well, focusing on maybe some of that silver lining, we've talked a little bit about, obviously we are the Wisconsin Parkinson's Association. We've talked about Parkinson's disease. How do you, and I don't know what your experience with Parkinson's disease is, Rick, but if you think of, mindfulness, habit changing, how do you see that help people in their day-to-day lives, whether they have a chronic condition or not?
Well, what's interesting, another, added benefit of mindfulness is that it reminds us of our powerful mind and body connection. And so, for instance, whether it's Parkinson's or another physiological or physical challenge, we can forget that there is that they work together. There's an inseparable bond between mind and body. And as we talk about mindfulness, and perhaps some of the viewers or listeners are thinking of those times where their symptoms have been reduced when they've been mindful. That's the perfect example, I guess, or proof that there is an incredible mind-body connection. There's a partnership. And when we get our mind and body working together, healing and growth and health is inevitable. So there's a woman doctor, I believe she's a Dr. Ellen Langer, that wrote a really cool book, one of my favorite mindfulness books, called Counterclockwise. And in the 70s, her and her staff, I believe she was at Harvard, put together a study where they had, I think it was 2 groups of 8 elderly men. And I'm just going to give you the brief details. They created an environment where they had them stay for a week. They converted a monastery into housing for these 16 men. 8, and so there was a control group of 8, and then the experimental group of 8. For the experimental group of 8, they had everything set up that it was like 1959. So the TVs were black and white. The TV shows were everything that was running then. The music, the newspapers, and these 8 men were instructed to act as if it was 1959. And then the other group came a week later and were instructed to remember what it was like then. And you could talk about it, but there was a subtle difference between, and it has to do with mindfulness, about acting as if and being mindful like it was 1959. And what they found is that a number of physical and physiological changes occurred in the experimental group, actually in both groups, but even more in the group that acted as if and talked as if everything was happening as if it was 1959. So their blood pressure went down, their eyesight improved, their finger length improved. So the arthritis lessened and their finger length was measurably better. Their appearance, they had objective people look at pictures, before and after pictures, and their appearance changed. And this was all about their mindset, about being mindful in that moment. If your viewers or listeners would like, they can email me and I'll send them some pretty cool videos, both about that study as well as some resources that I have. So what Ellen Langer and a lot of other researchers have found is that being mindful kind of allows us to take back our natural power, our right and our authority in choosing how we think and feel. And that can have a dramatic impact on how we feel physically.
That's a great definition, Rick. I think first I'm going to step back. For those listening, we will put Rick's email on the video description, so you can click on that and get Rick's information that way. But I think you hit on a lot of things with Parkinson's disease when you talk about focusing on the mindfulness of the present and not worrying about, I too often hear is, I got diagnosed just when I was going to get ready to retire, and they focus on all the negatives that have happened since the diagnosis, whereas there's a lot of positives that have happened. But it's hard to look at that when you have a chronic condition. And I think when you talk about focusing on the mindfulness, focusing on that moment, you physically feel better. And when you physically feel better and the mind-body connection works, your symptoms are going to get better, your mood's going to get better. I've always told people when I do a support group, I worked with a doctor once, and he said, I can tell you how a patient's going to react to the disease and how their disease is going to do just by how they present in the clinic. If they come in and they're a joker and they're a laugher and they're having fun and they're just like, yeah, it's part of me, but I'm going to move on and I have all this other stuff to do, they usually do really well.
Makes sense.
If you have the kind of the Eeyore persona where you come in and it's woe is me and everything, their symptoms are never going to do very well because they always have that negative mindset. So I think your definition of mindfulness is very important in how physically and physiologically people can do long-term and short-term with any diagnosis.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that, that you've seen it and heard it, and I think it's intuitively we know that there is an incredible mind and body connection, and that when we have an optimistic, a hopeful mindset rather than hopeful rather than hopeless, our body responds.
Well, and I think this is important for the patients and the care partners. It's focusing on the now, focusing on what's going on now, not what could have happened, what's going to happen. I think that's really, really important. And I think it segues into one of my other questions a little bit. We've talked, you've given us a lot of ideas what mindfulness is, how to develop good habits and stay with them. What other tools do you have or would you recommend to people to really maximize their potential and maximize their ability to be mindful and in the moment, and really grow from there?
Yeah, great question. So thanks for saying you'll put my email in the information below. So viewers or listeners can just email me and just, in the subject line or in the message, say, WPA mindfulness info, and I'll send a number of links. And among the links that I send are things that I teach my clients, and I work with clients individually or in group and with organizations, the basic steps to understand and learn mindfulness. And in general, a few of these tools or processes are, the most simple and basic thing we can do to practice mindfulness is taking our attention to our breath. Just a simple extended inhale and exhale. In fact, even as we're talking now, in just 5 or 10 seconds, our listeners can take their attention to their breath with just a nice deeper inhale and an exhale, and noticing that breath. And so how can people notice a breath? They can notice the feeling at their nose or mouth, the feeling of the air as it goes in and out of their body. They can notice the sound of the breath. They can notice the feeling in their chest or abdomen. And in those few seconds, most people afterwards, if you ask them, how do you feel now? They feel just subtly more relaxed. And so mindful breathing, one breath after another, is a simple way to practice. Again, through repetition is how we build new habits. So focusing on our breath. I'll also include, if your viewers or listeners would like, in that link that I'll send them are some exercises that I teach my clients. I call one an inner mindfulness. Again, it's choosing to focus on positive thoughts, like having a happy heart, a peaceful mind, and a playful spirit. And for especially as adults and perhaps somebody who's dealing with something like Parkinson's or another illness, the playful spirit can be something we forget and lose, but we can choose to be in that place. And then there's an outer mindfulness exercise that I'll share, where it's just being very mindful of your environment, the sights, the sounds, the sensations around you. Those are processes that any of us can do consciously and mindfully that have an incredible impact on our mental, physical, and emotional well-being.
I want to focus on the breath for a moment, so to speak, because you just focused on it literally.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important tool because we can all do it. We all have it in our toolbox. We all hopefully are breathing right now.
Right.
It's a tool you can use. And it reminds me of when we were all kids and something would happen, mom and dad or grandpa and grandma or whoever would say, take a deep breath and count to 10. And I think that's kind of what you just said, is take that deep breath, focus on what's going on, and just taking that deep breath and focusing on you at that moment brings you back to the moment and maybe helps with whatever that stressor is. And it maybe isn't as bad as you thought it was once you get that 5-10 seconds of that deep breath.
Absolutely, 100%. And I love the point that you bring up. It's so subtle, yet we can forget, as we're dealing with something like Parkinson's, or even just the anxiety of the current environment out there. We can, kind of beat ourselves up. I need to take my medication. I need to carry it with me. I can't forget that. I need to do these exercises. I need to do these things. But we always have with us that breath. We can never forget it. We can never leave it at home. We can never forget to put it in our car or purse. We always have that to turn to. And I guarantee the more you practice this simple exercise of being mindful, inhales and exhales, you'll recognize the power in it, and it's always with you. Like when I teach my clients, a simple mantra: from the moment we're born to the moment we pass, it's with us. It's always there.
That's a great mantra. I think everybody can remember that very easily, and it's a good one to have. I think we've covered a lot on mindfulness, good habits, just really being in the present and in the moment. I want to touch on one thing before I ask you the last question. We kind of dabbled in it in the very beginning. You talked about mindfulness is being in the moment with your thoughts and feelings without judgment. That's a hard one for us. I think a lot of people, judgment is just, it's human nature once in a while. How do you work with people to try and get that judgment out and focus on yourself, not the external?
Yeah, great question, Jeremy. And it is a habit. We often may like to think, well, I'm not that judgmental, but if we look at ourselves, we're usually incredibly judgmental of ourselves. And then that transfers over to other people, our thoughts, our feelings, our life around us. So it does take practice, and it can be difficult. So the first thing we have to remember and realize is that, nothing is right or wrong unless we say it's so. So if we just choose to pause that judgment even if throughout our life, whether it's something we've been taught or something that we've, that we recognize where the teaching has come from, or whether it's just something that we've chosen to be judgmental about, is just for the moment, for the benefit of our well-being, to not look at that thought, that feeling, that situation around us as good or bad, but just to observe it, just to be an unbiased observer and to notice. And so if we're feeling anxiety, it's easy to say, I don't like this feeling. I can tell what it's doing to me. My palms are sweaty. My heartbeat is racing. I have a headache. Um, but in and of themselves, we can just notice my palms are sweaty. My heartbeat is going faster. And just notice from an observant standpoint, look at that. And not judge it, not say it's bad. And ever so softly and subtly, when we choose to be non-judgmental, whether it's a feeling we have, whether it's a newscast that we see, whether it's a politician that we don't agree with, when we can just notice and choose in that moment to not be judgmental, it makes it easier the next time. And it has an exponential stacking effect, that by consciously choosing to just notice and not attach meaning or judgment to it, it makes it easier. And then the benefits multiply. Does that help?
I think that's great. And I think it actually goes back to something you said earlier, what you kind of alluded to, is repetition. The more you work on not being judgmental, the more you're not going to be judgmental down the road. I think that's really a good point. And I bring it up because I think when I work with people with Parkinson's disease, when I go to a support group or an exercise group, or we do some of our programs, they're always worried about, well, when I go in public, I walk a little slower, I got a bit of a handshake, I'm worried everybody's looking at me and judging me. Well, if we ourselves can work on not being judgmental, we really, and focusing on the here and now, we shouldn't care what they're thinking.
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of what you just said.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Excellent. Well, anything you want to add, Rick, that we haven't touched on so far? I think we've covered a lot, but anything you would want to just closing words you'd want to leave somebody with?
Yeah, we have covered a lot. Thanks again for the opportunity. I guess, just the last thing is that we all have the ability to be mindful. We do it all the time, but we can do it more so. We have the ability to consciously be mindful. And when we are mindful, we are taking back control of the one of the few things, the things that separate us from all the other species on the earth, is our ability to choose. It gives us the ability to take back control over our thoughts, our feelings, because ultimately, and when we're given a diagnosis, when we're dealing with something that we didn't ask for, that was in many ways thrust upon us, we can feel out of control. That there are so many things happening around us that are out of our control. But the one thing that we, especially as we practice, can have more and more control over is our own internal thoughts and feelings. And when we are mindful, we are taking back that control of that one thing that we have control over. And it is only ourselves that have the right, the power, and the authority to control how we think and feel. And so I would just, ask your viewers and listeners just to remember that it is they themselves that have the right, the power, and the authority to control how they think and feel. And being mindful is a great way to take back that control.
Great way to finish it, Rick. I think it's a really good point. That I'll go back to what I said earlier. Your mom and dad, your grandpa and grandma, whoever you grew up with, told you at the time, only you can control how you feel about you. And I think you just hammered that home again. As adults, we forget that once in a while. We let other people dictate how we feel about ourselves, and we really shouldn't. We should be in charge of that.
100% agree.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time today and really sharing some really good information in mindfulness and just staying in the moment and taking care of yourself. Now, for the viewers, we are glad you are checking with Wisconsin Parkinson Association frequently. We regularly update our website and Facebook page with exercise classes, educational videos such as this one, and a number of other resources for you to take control in your Parkinson's journey. You can email us at mail@wiparkinson.org with future topics you'd like to see us cover on these videos in the future with local experts. Now, hopefully you're finding this educational video series beneficial. WPA relies on donations from individuals just like you to keep these programs provided. You can consider a gift today at wiparkinson.org to continue to keep all WPA programs free and all our services free now and in the future. Once again, I'd like to thank Rick for being our guest today. Thank you for joining us. Take care and have a good day.